What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Today it is Lazy Daze Tubby, and I'm back at it again with some more history reaction for you guys today on my solo channel, and I am doing some more early Muslim expansion part 4 by Kings and General. I'm really enjoying this story and finding out more about Khalid and also some more about the Muslim expansion in general. So if you guys haven't already, please head over to Kings and Generals page. A link is in the description box down below. He makes some amazing content. If you haven't already, like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell to keep up with all future content that I make over here. But other than that, I'm just going to jump straight into this one.
Khalid was about to attack deeper into Persian territory, but he soon after received a letter from the Caliph Abu Bakr at the Rashidun capital of Medina. The letter ordered him to cease his attacks on the Sassanids and to move into Syria to battle the Romans. So Khalid and a small contingent of his army prepared to move west. As with the Mesopotamian invasions, there had probably been no better opportunity for a strike into Roman lands, as the destructive quarter-century-long conflict from 602 to 628 had undermined crucial defences in both regions. The Roman East, with all its religious, cultural, financial and strategic significance, was now dangerously vulnerable. During 633, the Muslims sent 4 separate corps to invade Palestine, in addition to the areas around the Sea of Galilee, the River Jordan and the Dead Sea. Though they achieved success, assaults on the large urban settlements of the region could not be considered until reinforcements were brought up.
Makes sense.
So, both for the additional troops and for Khalid's expertise in warfare, Abu Bakr sent the order for him to move west. To save time and to bypass Roman defences, the Muslim general chose a more dangerous route through an especially desolate, waterless stretch of the Syrian desert, much to the alarm of his sub-commanders. In order to survive, it is reported that Khalid, in his ingenuitive way, ordered 20 camels be forced to drink large amounts of water so that they could be used as makeshift storage tanks. The beasts were then periodically slaughtered along the journey when nourishment was needed, and the water was then harvested from the camels.
That's very smart.
After 5 grueling days of marching through this desolate landscape, the 9,000-strong Muslim army emerged at Suwa. Then they swiftly inflicted a minor defeat on the Roman Arab clients, the Ghassanids, at Marj al-Rahit, while they were celebrating Easter. Proving his strategy correct, Khalid's improbable desert crossing had also neutralized the Byzantine defenses on the Arabian border.
Wow, that's impressive.
Now he turned south, towards the Syrian town of Bosra, where the arrival of his reinforcements led to its capture by mid-July of 634. Despite this success, the Muslims had little time to celebrate. Roman Emperor Heraclius, who was now in Emesa, sent his brother Theodore and an Armenian general named Wardan south towards Ajnadain, 25 miles southeast of Jerusalem, where they began to gather a large army. Spies reported this gathering force to the invaders, and the burgeoning Caliphate's army marched to meet their Byzantine opponents. Very few hard facts are known about this battle, but we can reconstruct a version of the fight using the available sources. Muslim accounts vastly exaggerate the number of Roman troops they faced, and it is likely even that the weakened Byzantine forces in Syria, 10,000 strong and commanded by Wardan and Theodore, were outnumbered by the 15,000 Muslims. Both armies formed up in extended lines, with their camps to the rear, and both sides stood ready with 3 divisions of infantry, right, left and centre, while each wing had a cavalry flank guard. Behind the Muslim centre was a small reserve, and in front of their centre was a small group of champions. Before the battle began, a Christian bishop rode over to Khalid's army and attempted to negotiate a Muslim withdrawal. However, the Rashidun general simply responded by offering the traditional choice: conversion to Islam, payment of the jizya tax, or death in battle.
Well then, that way
The
it is, I
fighting
guess.
at Ajnadayn began when the Byzantine auxiliary missile units, stationed ahead of the main line, began to rain arrows and stones on their adversaries. As the superior Byzantine ranged units loosed, the Muslims suffered losses and were unable to respond.
However, one Muslim warrior named thire, heavily armoured and brandishing a heavy shield stolen from a Roman soldier, marched directly into the arrow fire, shouting his war cry.
Okay.
After the hail of missiles ceased, thire and his entourage of fellow champions were met by their Byzantine counterparts, and it is said the Muslims got the better of the fighting, slaying several Roman elite warriors and 2 generals.
Yes.
As the dueling came to an end, the Rashidun army attacked, and the subsequent fighting was a slogging match with little maneuver and lasted until nightfall.
Okay.
The next day, Byzantine commander Wardan attempted to lure Khalid into a trap by offering a parley, but the plan went wrong and he was instead killed by the fearsome thire.
Interesting.
Aiming to exploit the confusion which this loss of leadership caused in the Roman ranks, the Arabs attacked again, with their flanks in front and centre behind. After savage hand-to-hand fighting, which exhausted and depleted both armies, Khalid deployed his 4,000-strong reserve in the centre and drove deep wedges through the Roman formations in this area. Unable to withstand the pressure any further, their line collapsed.
Well played.
After this defeat, Emperor Heraclius sent his brother Theodore back to Constantinople in disgrace. At the same time, the remnants of his shattered army, in addition to the local Roman population, withdrew to the apparent safety of the walled cities, which subsequently became crowded with refugees. Perhaps an omen of things to come, Heraclius then retreated with his headquarters further north to the city of Antioch, due to the fact that Muslim forces now controlled the countryside and were expected to advance on the most prominent urban centre in the area. A week after their victory at Ajnadayn, the Arab forces began to march north in the direction of Damascus. On their way, they had to leave a mounted detachment at the city of Fal, ancient Pella, to keep the Roman garrison there tied down while the main army marched onward. After this was done, the Muslims reached Yakusa on the southern bank of the Yarmouk River. Here they were opposed by a blocking force of Byzantine troops on the northern shore. They were in no real position to offer serious permanent resistance, but they were there to delay the invaders and to allow the great city to further prepare for a coming siege. After a short battle here and another battle against 12,000 Romans at the Yellow Meadow, otherwise known as Major Safar, the road was clear to Damascus. When the invading Arabs neared the city, the Muslim commander realized that his forces were not numerous enough to encircle it entirely. Instead, each of the Muslim sub-commanders stationed their contingents outside of the city's various gates, fully blockading the crucial thoroughfares by August 21st with a total of around 20,000 soldiers, 16,000 infantry, and 4,000 mobile guard cavalry. Damascus immediately began starving due to the lack of supplies and unpreparedness for a siege, while the Muslims were well supplied due to their domination of the fertile and productive local countryside. As the swift Arab light horsemen were relatively useless in a siege, Khalid ibn al-Walid sent a few hundred of them to the Eagle's Pass to the north in order to act as scouts. Here they watched for any Byzantine relief force aiming to pass through this choke point. The other half stayed near the city as a reserve, ready to help repel any sortie made by the Romans.
Makes sense.
In Antioch, the Roman emperor learned of the siege and sent a 12,000-strong relief force, along with plentiful supplies, to help Damascus on September 9th. When this force reached the narrow pass where the Muslim scouts were stationed, they pushed the cavalry back. One of these scouts managed to send notice to al-Walid, and he, gambling that repelling the relief attempt was more important than maintaining too tight a blockade, took the remaining cavalry at night to the Eagle Pass, where he managed to rout the Romans.
No way!
Despite their apparent success, the besieging Arab forces were now stretched thin by Khalid's withdrawal.
Wait a minute, did he actually just rout them? Get rid of them like that? Like, in the middle of the night, it was that easy, they didn't expect it coming. Really? That's a big surprise.
Thin by Khalid's withdrawal. Historians believe that if the garrison's general Thomas had chosen to launch a sortie at this point, the Byzantines could have broken the siege, but they did not and therefore lost the opportunity.
Sometimes it's worth.
It seems that Al-Walid realized he had put the siege in danger with his gamble, and he hurriedly returned to Damascus after he attained victory at the Eagle's Pass. As the garrison and Thomas realized that no relief was coming, morale among the defenders of Damascus became weaker and weaker. It was clear action would be needed. So the emperor's son-in-law decided to launch a counter-offensive of his own. For this first attack, Thomas decided to concentrate on one specific section of the city, drawing men together from all sectors of the city towards the Gate of Thomas, where he was faced by around 5,000 soldiers under Shurabil.
Okay. Was there any reason he chose this point?
After the defending soldiers gathered in the area, the Byzantine commander began his sortie by ordering his archers to rain down a constant stream of arrows against their enemy, to which the Arabs responded accordingly. Using the cover granted by the Roman missile units, the infantry rushed through the Gate of Thomas and fanned out into battle formation, with Thomas himself leading the assault. During the subsequent skirmish, it is reported that Thomas both broke through a section of the Muslim line and almost killed Shurabil, but he was then shot in the eye by the widow of a slain Arab soldier.
Wow.
Despite some level of success, the sortie had failed to break the siege, and the Byzantine forces retreated into the city. As they did, it is said that the injured Roman leader swore to take 1,000 eyes in return for his own.
Well, let's see if he's able to do that,
That night, another plan to break the siege was devised by the defenders. As a concentrated attack on one of the gates had failed, Thomas would this time launch simultaneous strikes from 4 of the gates. 2 large forces were gathered, at the eastern gate where Khalid was in command, and at the Gate of Thomas, where the main attack against exhausted enemy units would be undertaken. Right. The other forces at the small gate and the Jabir gate were designed to pin their besiegers in place. As Thomas sounded the attack, a grinding battle took place at the Jabir gate, with both sides suffering many losses. After a while of this slaughter, Abu Ubaidah and his forces at this gate managed to doggedly repulse the Byzantine assault, driving them back into the city. The situation was far more serious at the eastern gate, where the Byzantines had a larger force. This larger contingent of defenders managed to break the Arab infantry and drive them back, but Khalid himself then arrived with 400 elite mobile guard cavalry, and with them struck the Roman flank. This weakened the sortie irreversibly, and the defenders were slowly driven back inside the gates. Once again, however, the worst of the fighting occurred at the Gate of Thomas. Here, the Byzantine forces were led by the one-eyed Thomas himself, and after intense fighting, there was still no weakness in the Muslim ranks. At this point, the Roman commander seems to have realized there was no point in continuing the grinding melee, and commanded a slow, steady withdrawal. All the while, the Arab archers continually showered his men with arrows. This was the last effort by Thomas to break the Muslim siege, and it had failed with the loss of thousands of men. With this defeat, he could no longer afford any more attempts at a breakout. A Greek in Damascus, known as Jonah the Lover in Arab sources, climbed over the wall and informed Khalid that on the night of the 18th of September there would be a Christian religious ceremony which would leave the walls relatively unguarded. He supposedly betrayed his city because his marriage to his fiancée had been interrupted by the siege and, frustrated, asked for the Muslims' help in obtaining said bride. This man soon converted to Islam, but the details are incredibly vague.
That situation's interesting. I would like to know more
Whatever
about
the case, details of the opportunity led Khalid to borrow ladders from a local monastery and to purchase ropes in order to form an assault party. That night, a 100-strong contingent, led by the Muslim general himself, climbed the walls, dropped into the city and killed the guards at the eastern gate. Then the attackers flung open the gate and let the remainder of the Muslim forces at the eastern gate inside the city. The other Byzantine detachments stationed elsewhere were unaware of this surprising development, and instead of helping, stayed at their posts. At the same time, Khalid began to fight his way towards the center of the city. Now attempting to save the city for a final time, Thomas sent envoys to Abu Ubaidah at the western Jabiyah gate, offering surrender and a payment of the jizya in exchange for a capitulation by terms. This was given by the supposedly peace-loving Abu Ubaidah. However, Khalid, who had finished slaughtering his way to the center of the city, was furious that a surrender had been allowed even though the city had technically been taken by storm. Nevertheless, the many Muslim unit commanders agreed that a surrender would be honored. Khalid reluctantly accepted this judgment.
The fall of Damascus was a shock for the Byzantines, as they probably thought that the Muslim attack on the region was a massive raid and not a full-on invasion. Syria and Egypt were the most important provinces of the empire, and the fall of the former would mean that the land route to the latter was cut, and it was now also vulnerable to being occupied. Emperor Heraclius couldn't allow that, so he started sending orders to the provinces in order to bring in more reinforcements to the region.
Okay, so how are we going to
Simultaneously, the political situation in the Caliphate had also changed, as Caliph Abu Bakr passed away in late August of that year, and was replaced by Umar. The new Caliph immediately started implementing administrational and military reforms, creating new administrative positions in the provinces, and changing the formation of the army from the one created on the tribal principle to a more centralized one. Immediately after his ascension, Umar sent a letter to the army relieving Khalid of his post and appointing Abu Ubaidah in his place. We don't know if this was part of the reforms, or as some sources claim, it happened due to the previous animosity between the new caliph and the general. In any case, it seems that before the messengers could reach Damascus, the 3-day peace the Muslims promised Thomas had passed, and Khalid, alongside 5,000 cavalry, guided by Jonah, started pursuing the Romans. Thomas had around 10,000 people with him, both soldiers and citizens of Damascus, but instead of finding refuge in one of the nearby towns, this group was heading towards Antioch, and that allowed the Arab cavalry to catch up to them to the south of Latakia sometime in late September.
So these are the people he just let go, right? But the ones that
the details of the engagement, now known as the Battle of Maraj al-Dibaj, are scarce, but according to the Muslim sources, a cavalry detachment of a few hundred caught up and took position to the south of Thomas. The Romans immediately noticed them, deciding that they would be able to defeat this small group with ease. To the surprise of the Romans, as soon as the Arab cavalry and Roman infantry started fighting, another group of Khalid's horsemen appeared to the east. Although the Romans had thousands of refugees in their midst, they still outnumbered the Muslims, and a portion of their infantry formed up to face the new threat.
Okay.
However, a half hour after the battle was joined here, a third group of Arab cavalry started charging from the north, and the Romans barely got into a defensive formation in time to prevent it from breaking through. Thomas's situation was becoming dangerous, as the route to Damascus was now cut off, but the Romans were still fighting on an equal footing, and the battle raged on 3 sides. An hour later, Khalid himself appeared to the west with the largest part of his army and charged the Romans. Despite the fact that Thomas managed to get a few units to this front, they were swept aside almost immediately, and the Arab cavalry was now deep inside the Roman formation. Thomas was soon killed. The Roman resistance continued for some time, but was broken within an hour. Some soldiers and refugees managed to slip away to the north, but the majority of the Romans were either killed or captured. Khalid lost just a few hundred troops.
Wow.
Immediately afterwards, the Arabs headed to Damascus and reached it in early October. Apparently, Abu Ubaidah already received the messenger from the Caliph and informed Khalid of his demotion. According to sources, the latter accepted it without much protest, but it did change the flow of the Caliphate's expansion in the region. Abu Ubaidah was much slower and more deliberate than Khalid. Umar preferred a more hands-on approach to the armies, often issuing orders after every engagement, which slowed down the campaigns due to the distance to Medina. He even placed informers in the army, which made Abu Ubaidah even more careful in his decisions. At the same time, the Muslims received some reinforcements, bringing the total number of their troops to...
At this point, it's really showing us how involved the government, the government or the political people are getting involved within the army as well then, because they're obviously keeping an eye on things. They don't want anyone to get too powerful to possibly maybe run for position later, so on and so forth. It's really interesting.
1,000. However, that wasn't the only change in command made by Umar, which brings us back to Iraq, where Khalid left Muthanna in charge of a 9,000 strong army in 634. For the next few months, Muthanna, whose numbers weren't enough to conquer any more lands, implemented the tactic of raids in order to keep the superior Sassanid forces at bay. The details are lost to time, but the Sassanids, who were used to fighting in pitched battles, were having a difficult time containing the raids, and one of them even reached Babylon.
Oh wow, that's quite far.
The best Sassanid commander, Rostam, who basically controlled the court of the 10-year-old Shah Yazdegerd, was reluctant to leave the capital, worried that it might incite another revolt. But Muthanna's raids were too dangerous, so the general decided to take command over the forces in Iraq and marched south, supported by the Sassanid generals Bahman, Jaban and Nasi, and the Armenian noble Jalinus.
Okay.
Even before this multi-pronged counterattack began, Muthanna knew that he needed reinforcements and sent a messenger to the capital. By August, this messenger was in Medina, just in time for the ascension of Umar. The new caliph appointed Abu Ubaid, not to be confused with Abu Ubaidah, to command in Iraq and gave him 6,000 or so troops to reinforce Muthanna. The latter was now informed of the Sassanid counterattack, and when Jaban got close to Al-Hira in late September, the Arab commander abandoned it, retreating to Kafan. By early October, Abu Ubaid joined him, bringing the total strength of the Caliphate's force to more than 15,000, a similar number to that commanded by Jaban, who crossed the Euphrates and was now at Namarik.
Right, so
the details of the battle at Namarik are not clear, but it seems that Jaban suffered a minor defeat and was forced to retreat beyond the river. Abu Ubaid decided to fight the approaching Sassanid armies in detail, and marched north towards Kaskar, hoping to defeat the smaller army under Nasi and knock him out. Although the Muslims won again, the Persian army managed to retreat mostly intact, and Abu Ubaid, who knew that Jalinus might cut his retreat to Al-Hira, moved his army double time to prevent this from happening. Indeed, the army of the Caliphate reached the city before Jalinus blocked them. The closest Sassanid armies to Al-Hira were those of Jalinus and Bahman. A letter from Rostam ordered them to unite their troops, cross the Euphrates and attack the city. In late October of 634, their united armies, numbering around 20,000, attempted to force the river near Kufa, but Abu Ubaid and his 15,000 were able to halt this crossing. For some time, the armies stood in front of each other screaming insults, until a Sassanid emissary approached Abu Ubaid with Bahman's message: "Either you cross over to our side and we shall let you, or we shall cross over to your side and you must let us."
What? Wow.
Although his officers protested it, Abu Ubaid was eager to cross and fight in a pitched battle, so he ordered his army to do that. Seeing this, Bahman repositioned his troops slightly to the north, allowing the Muslims to move across and form up. Unlike previous battles, The Persians had a dozen or so elephants, and they were placed in the vanguard with heavy cavalry between them and the infantry in the second echelon.
Okay.
Abu Ubaid's army crossed the river in 2 hours and started to get into formation, once again with horsemen in front and the footmen in the second line. Bahman continued to wait, and it was Abu Ubaid who gave the order to his soldiers to attack. The Arab cavalry galloped forward, but their horses were scared of the elephants, probably seeing them for the first time, and the charge stopped before it managed to reach the Sassanid lines. In response, Bahman moved his archers to the front and commanded them to shoot at the retreating Arabs. The volleys killed and wounded many, and when the leaders of the army of the Caliphate attempted to move their archers forward to start skirmishing, the whole Arab line became chaotic and disjointed.
No.
The Persian commander used that and directed his cavalry and elephants to attack. While the cavalry was mostly stopped, the elephants easily created wedges everywhere they struck. The Arab army was slowly but surely forced back. The presence of the elephants was panicking the horses, so in order to stabilize the front, Abu Ubaid commanded his horsemen to dismount. He led a group of warriors himself, killing a few elephants and their entourages.
Nice.
However, another elephant was sent towards the Arab leader, and soon he was killed by the beast.
No.
Many other Muslim leaders were killed, and their army started fleeing in chaos, and the Sassanids started chasing them. Muthanna was one of the last remaining commanders, and he achieved some degree of discipline and organization at the crossing, leading the rearguard and allowing the remainder of the army to retreat. He was badly wounded during the fight, but his actions saved thousands.
Nice.
The Battle of the Bridge was the first battle the Persians won in this war.
People, do you know what I mean?
More than 10,000 Muslims lay dead, while the Sassanid casualties were around 2,000. Over the following weeks, Bahman didn't pursue Muthanna, who withdrew to Ulays and returned to Ctesiphon. Some sources claim that there was another rebellion against Rostam, others that Bahman was sent to deal with the Turkic raiders. The sources are also conflicted on the events that happened in Iraq later in 634 and then in 635, with some chronicles asserting that Muthanna's army deserted and he abandoned all the previous conquests, and others stating that the Sassanids sent a large army under Miran and it was decisively defeated at Buwaib in April of 635. In any case, this lull in action allows us to return to the Levant.
And I guess that is where we will pick it up in part 4. I really enjoyed finding out some more about this. Interesting that Khalid got taken away. Obviously, I don't know if he comes back. I'm hoping so, but we shall see. Yes, it's interesting that the Caliph who took over has taken Khalid away. But obviously, there was still a lot gained in that. Obviously, the Muslims had a defeat over against the Sassanids, so that was interesting as well. They struggled against the elephants, so I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how they adapt to the elephants in the next battle against them. So yeah, I'm definitely really looking forward to it. If you guys have enjoyed my reaction, then please like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, but I will catch you in the next video.